These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, DeVoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. DeVoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit DeVoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western caucus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher Ketchum.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've got a big program for the day. In our second hour, Charlie Sykes is going to drop by. We're going to be talking about reinventing the Republican Party. Is it even possible? Is it desirable? It's going to be a fascinating conversation. He's an old line Republican. And in Geeky Science, do plant-based meats improve your heart? We'll get into that in our third hour. But our first hour, it's Wednesday, first hour Wednesday, and Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C., and in Wisconsin, where he hails from, where he represents the 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. His Twitter handle is Rep. Mark Pocan, P-O-C-A-N, and you can find his website at pocan.house.gov. Congressman, welcome back to the program. And I should add for our listeners, if you happen to be a first-time listener, Congressman Pocan will be with us for the full hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. Congressman, welcome back. Kamala Harris, woohoo! I'm very happy with this. I'm curious your thoughts on this nominee. I saw this post over on Democratic Underground this morning, and it was titled "Horrible VP Pick," and you open it, and it says, doesn't believe in climate change, does believe in Noah's Ark, and then there's a picture of Mike Pence. So it's like, thank God we've got Kamala Harris. What are your thoughts?
Right. Well, I think she will perform that duty excellently. I mean, I can't imagine a debate with her and Mike Pence. We saw how she handled Brett Kavanaugh on the committees. We saw how she handled herself during the campaign, and I think she'll be a real asset to Joe Biden in running. And I think, this is also historic, and this is part of where America is, in the fact that we, as the Democratic Party, are representing the country. That's important. Every person who would have been selected would have had something that someone's not going to like, and I don't think you dwell on the 1 or 2%, you dwell on the 98%, right? And this is good for the Democratic Party. It's good for Joe Biden, and this is, in places like Wisconsin, going to be important because, one, I think her intelligence and her image is going to go over well on the Skype and Zoom sessions that we now live through because, we can't really do the normal campaigning. But I think it's going to be very helpful in places like Wisconsin that are swing states.
Yeah, the thing that I like the two things that I like the most about her is, number one, she is a strong person who knows how to take names and kick ass. And I mean, she handed Joe Biden his backside in that debate, and he still picked her. I mean, you can't imagine Donald Trump even saying something nice about anybody who's ever criticized him. So Joe Biden is obviously a much bigger man than Donald Trump. And she's she's politically very, very effective. I think the Republicans are scared to death of this nomination, number one. And number two, she's willing to change her mind, because of, both philosophy and practicality. She embraced Medicare for all, and then she backed away from it a little when it became obvious that was going to be politically harmful. I don't see that as a bad thing, frankly. I think being able to get things done and understanding things like Medicare for all are good things.
She understood the fundamentals of why it was important. I think, when it became an issue because some of the other candidates tried to make it an issue to differentiate themselves, it became a little more difficult. But we know, that right now COVID has made the case stronger than anything ever during a Democratic debate. And we know that she's already been forward at one point. So I think, she's going to be a very effective candidate, having been a U.S. Senator from the largest state in the country, having run the Attorney General's office in California. You want someone who's ready to be president as well. And she really has those credentials that are going to be important. I'll be honest, I was a little worried about Susan Rice. I thought she wouldn't have been a great selection for a vice president. I think she's great at many other things, but you'd have to reintroduce her to the public, and this was the right selection by Joe Biden.
Yeah, my concern about Susan Rice was that she'd never run for consequential political office, and you just don't know if those muscles work.
I agree.
Being a politician is actually a unique skill set. It's one of the reasons that I've never tried. I mean, I would be terrible at it, but But some folks are really good at it, and she's right at the top of that list. Well, let's pick up some phone calls here. Let's
Sure.
Get going. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona, you are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Greetings to all. Congressman Pocan, I'm the Madison native. We've spoken before. One thing I'd like to say is the guy who's hosting this program, he should be the main advisor to the Democratic Party. He's brilliant. Secondly,
I hear you.
You betcha. Secondly, my wife's 57. Her office moved to Houston, so she's in the advertising business, and so this happened end of April. So she's going to be without a job for a while with the pandemic and everything else here. We used to have 99 weeks of unemployment benefits, and that's when times were not as bad as they are now. And the Republicans reduced them to approximately, 26 weeks? We might be at 39 now. I don't know. Is there any way we can get these benefits back up to 99 weeks, sir? Thanks so much, Representative Pocan.
Yeah, didn't that cut happen during the Bush years?
I don't remember because I wasn't around when it happened, so it could have been. That was before I was in Congress. But, Steve, anything is possible come, January if we take the White House. We have the potential to do whatever we need to do, and there's going to be a lot to need to do after this president. Right now, even during the negotiations, you could have additional changes made to unemployment, and they should. The problem is, the president did his reality show star act this weekend by doing executive orders, some that are meaningless, some that are unconstitutional, and some that we're not sure how they even work or whether they work.
Congressman Pocan, I think you might have accidentally muted your microphone or something, because suddenly you just went silent. He's oh, really? We're talking to him via his phone, right? You want to pick up the Skype audio? Okay. Oh, no, he just disconnected. He just vanished from the line. I'm guessing he's going to call right back. So in the meantime, I know one of our callers is going to ask about the post office. This story, this is very concerning, and something that we all need to be paying attention to. The clerk of the elections clerk in Sterling Heights, Michigan. This is one of the Detroit suburbs. One of the major Detroit suburbs are in that area. This is in Macomb County, and which is population-wise huge. And the clerk in Sterling Heights, Michigan, said that 165 ballots arrived too late to be counted for the primary that was August 4th, even though they were postmarked 5 days before the primary. So here we go, and this was, in a primary that was decided by 87 votes. They came in with July 30th postmarks, and they didn't arrive until August 10th. Meanwhile, you've got people in Michigan saying that they're getting their ballots late and everything else. So Congressman Pocan is back with us. So Congressman, you vanished there for a minute.
Somehow a phone call came in on my cell and somehow knocked me out of the system. I apologize. I don't know how much you heard of my answer to Steve, so I don't want to repeat myself necessarily, but I think, Steve, once the Democrats are in control, we can do anything, and we should do things around unemployment. But right now it's a little difficult because, Donald Trump did his little fake executive actions this weekend, and now we haven't had any meetings for 3 days. So we've got to do more on UI.
Yeah, amen. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is here with us for the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls. And we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. His website, Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, back with your calls for the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus right after this. welcome back. Jim in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hello. Thank you,
Jim,
for taking the call. I have a question for the Congressman. What is the Democratic plan for guaranteeing that all votes are going to be counted? Obviously, there are many roadblocks, but I really think that is the issue of issues, and appreciate an answer.
Sure, Jim. I think, the real issue we're facing is around the mail-in ballots. We know that fewer people are going to vote in person on November 3rd, that mail-in ballots, the president's obviously against them because he doesn't want people voting. He wants to select voters rather than voters selecting the president. And he's doing much of what he's doing to the Postal Service. Part of it is in fight with, Jeff Bezos, but part of it is to discourage the ability for people to vote via mail. And I'm already hearing it from a bunch of people. He's being successful because they're like, well, I don't think I can vote by mail because I'm afraid it won't get there. You will get that ballot 6 weeks, depending on your state, 6 weeks before the election. Just don't wait until the Friday before the election to fill it out. Fill it out much sooner, and it will have plenty of time to get there. But that's the main thing is we're trying to make sure the Postal Service, for all reasons, is strong. But one of those reasons is to make sure that people can vote from home safely and do it like people do, like the president does, by voting absentee. But I think he is being somewhat effective in his messaging and what he's doing with the Postal Service that I have heard from a number of people every single day in the last week or 10 days, Tom. People are saying, I don't think I can vote by mail anymore because I'm not sure it's going to get there. That's exactly what Donald Trump wants people to think, and he wants it to somehow discourage voting.
The clerk in Macomb County, Michigan, just noted that a huge number of ballots arrived too late to be counted for that election, for the primary that they had last week. And she said that they were getting ballots. The majority of the ballots came in around August 10th, and they had July 30th postmarks. The primary was August 4th.
Yeah.
And so
what we're telling people,
these votes are not being counted. I mean, this is nuts.
Yeah, right. But Donald Trump is doing that, and we're trying to get money for the Postal Service, but he put in one of his people as a Postmaster General, and they're doing everything they can to slow it down. And unfortunately, he is successful in doing some of that. But having known that, if you get a ballot 6 weeks out, which is when they send them in most areas, that's how we get them in Wisconsin, do it within a week when you get it, and you'll get it there. But if you wait and sit on the ballot too long, then we're going to have a problem. So that's my message. You can also take that ballot you get and drop it off in many states. And we had a caller, I think last week, who mentioned that their library, I think, accepted the ballots. And there's different spots in every state, so you're going to have to find that out. So if you feel better dropping it off, do that. But don't wait to the last minute. That's the lesson we have to have. When people get the ballot, they need to turn the ballot around. I think they know who they're voting for at that point, and that way Donald Trump won't win. But he is trying to add confusion, and he's winning on that, and we can't let him discourage votes as an effort to win the election.
Congressman, the head of the Iowa Postal Workers Union yesterday made a public statement that they're physically removing sorting machines from Iowa post offices so that the sorting has to be done by hand. Is there anything Congress can do about this?
Yeah, I'll tell you, we were sending a letter today on behalf of all Democrats about all of these issues to the new general. But we'll do whatever we can. We don't have the full ability to try to stop that. However, I think people can get around that by voting early.
Voting early. Amen. We'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Welcome back. It is Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Horace in High Point, North Carolina, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, sir. Would you please do something for me, which is very, very important? That gentleman who they put in charge of the Postal Service is obstructing the mail. That's known. There's a federal law against anybody obstructing the mail. Why don't you sue them and prosecute them? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know about suing and prosecuting, but I can tell you at the highest levels they're working on this. The leaders, Speaker Pelosi is leading on this, and we have a letter going out today that we're working on as one of many actions. What I don't want to happen is what Donald Trump wants to happen, and he's succeeding on, is that as we all talk about how our ballots aren't going to get here, we will add confusion towards the November election. So I just really want to reiterate, I think it's important that when you get that ballot, which often will be 6 weeks before the election, fill it out early and either drop it off personally. You can do that if you're afraid it won't get there via mail, or mail it early, because then you'll have the certainty it'll happen. But don't let Donald Trump win. By having this conversation, I think more people are going to not trust that as a voting method, and they may not vote. And that's what Donald Trump wants. So let's not let Donald Trump win twice. He's going to lose in November because we're going to vote for Joe Biden. And then let's not let him win on what he's doing by trying to create confusion with the post office.
Linda in Coconut Creek, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Pocan, is there going to be anything in the stimulus bill regarding the pension plans and for the central states? And thank you for your help with the post office. I'll take your question off the air.
Sure, Linda. There was some pension matters that were in the HEROES Act. However, we don't know right now because the negotiations have broken down. I mean, literally where they were at, and Nancy Pelosi on Saturday gave us about an hour and 20-minute rundown of what's been happening. But in a very short form, the normal negotiations, we were at about $3 trillion, although we need more money for schools, because when we did the bill 3 months ago, we didn't know where we'd be at with the situation with the number of cases right now in schools opening. They were at $1 trillion. Nancy came and, as in any negotiation, said, why don't we get to $2 trillion and start from there? And they said no. That's because Donald Trump had his reality show all ready for the weekend to do executive orders. I don't think they worked the way he thought they were going to, but we haven't restarted the negotiations. So we don't have any particulars whatsoever. They're fighting hard on state and local funding. They're fighting hard on the post office. That we know. But we've got to do a lot to help people, and they're the ones that are, we did it 3 months ago, and they're holding all this up. So I don't have a good answer for you where the final negotiations will be, but we did have something in the HEROES Act that addressed pensions.
Kim in Port Huron, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, I'll be as quick as I can. Is there anything being done for individual states suing the government for removing mail sorting machines from post offices across the nation? That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. So let me just say, because I know a couple of people brought that up. I know of no lawsuit that goes fast, right? And even though there's some expedited ways you can do things, that's not going to necessarily be the answer. What Donald Trump is trying to do right now and succeeding on is creating confusion about whether or not you can vote by mail. And since people aren't going to vote in person, given the pandemic, he's trying to make it so that people won't know what to do. I still truly strongly believe that absentee and early voting is the best thing you can do. And if you don't want to vote in person, you can get an absentee ballot and you can drop it off rather than mail it in if you are worried about that. But if you get it 6 weeks out and you mail it 5 weeks out, it will get there in every likelihood. It is not going to be delayed that much. So, we just need to do what we can on our part, but a lawsuit is not a quick way to remedy this. We're doing everything we can at the federal level to try to, but, Donald Trump is trying to create confusion. And that goes beyond actual practice, and he's winning on creating the confusion right now. We can't let him win on that.
Samuel in Santa Ana, California. You got a quick question? We just have a minute to the break.
Yes, I do. Passport is a federal ID, and I don't see any way that they could mess with that. I am asking you if that is in fact true, because if it is, maybe we could get people to get passports for ID so they could bypass all this ID garbage in the red states. I'll take my answer off.
You're talking about voting
here.
Yeah, I can answer that real quick, Samuel. A passport's not a quick process, and it's an expensive process. It would be a poll tax because you have to pay for that passport. That would not likely be a solution.
Yeah, and okay, we have 20 seconds here. What is anything being done to push back against some of these voter suppression efforts? I'm assuming yes.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Holder has been probably, doing most of the work around this and gerrymandering around the country, and they've been working in all the states. So I think we will have good people on the ground making sure suppression doesn't work. And I know they did a test run in Wisconsin yesterday in our primary. The Democratic Party did, and I think they did a great job.
Good. Glad to hear it. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan after this break at the bottom of the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin, the U.S. House of Representatives.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You can reach him on Twitter at Rep. Mark Pocan, and his website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition. And instead, we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. On this week's Science Revolution, is a drug maker sitting on a possible COVID-19 cure just due to greed? Dr. Stephen Enstrop, chief scientist for Polar Bears International, is here. Could polar bears be lost by 2100? Food and Water Watch's Tony Corbo dissects Cory Booker's bill to protect meat packers and why it's important. In Geeky Science, we'll talk about why the coronavirus vaccine may not work well for obese people and how that's a big problem. And lastly, Michelle Obama speaks about anxiety during the pandemic and what we can all do. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. And Keith in Greenville, South Carolina, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman.
Hi, Keith.
Post Office Board of Directors is serve at the pleasure of the president. Is there something we can do to, and they are the ones that hired the Postmaster General, is there something we can do to put them on alternative terms, like serve 5-year terms or something, so that they're not all wiped out and put in by the whim of the president?
Yeah, so the president put this person in. I mean, it wasn't, you're right that he appoints the board of directors, but they're not the one who really picked this person. This was a Donald Trump pick. So if it was that problem, you could address it, but that still wouldn't address the current situation we're in with what's happening with the Postal Service. Interestingly, though, that same Board of Governors appointed by Donald Trump have all said we need $25 billion in bailout to help the Postal Service right now. That's what they need. So they've actually operated on a pretty, proper manner. It's this new Postmaster General that seems to be the problem.
Floyd in Baltimore, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Sir, a question. If I receive a mail-in ballot, I fill in the mail-in ballot, but hold it until the time of the voting booth action, the days of the election, may I turn it in then?
Physically at the election polling place, you mean?
Yeah, I would say check with your I would check with your locality before you did that. Here's what you can do, though. You get the ballot, and you can drop it off at a number of places, and it'll all depend, again, by your locality. Some have libraries. Some have it at the city hall or town or village, halls. You can drop off the ballot, and you can then make sure it's in. They have it officially where you want it without having to worry about mailing it back. If you're afraid of that, you certainly can do that. But I wouldn't wait till election day to do that because, again, you're taking a risk. I would just do it early. I mean, nothing is going to change in the final month, I'm guessing, in anywhere about who you're going to vote for. I think, you either know if you're voting for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And as you go down ticket, if you have a question on the legislative race, it's going to be, with the exception of, I think, Washington and California, where you have jungle primaries, it might be two Democrats running against each other. In most cases, it's a pretty big divide between the philosophy of the two candidates. You should be able to do that early, and I really think that's the best advice. And if you want, drop it off early, but don't wait until Election Day.
Pamela in Bremerton, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hello, thank you. Trump said he wouldn't cut social programs, but his budget proposal includes over $2 trillion in cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And I don't think the public, specifically the Trump voters, know about it. Are the Democrats going to keep repeating and hammering this point in the media so that his voters do know about it?
Yeah, absolutely, Pamela. So, you're talking, and I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and I see often when he's cut some of these programs in his proposed budget. But I think he has weasel words to get around that being, what actually happened, because we never let it happen at the end of the day. However, I think where he made one of his mistakes on the executive orders is by saying he's holding, you don't have to pay payroll taxes. Yeah, he always forgets the asterisk, but you're going to have to pay them in January. You're just postponing them. But by not paying into that Social Security fund, you are jeopardizing the interest that they would be making. I could be wrong on this, Tom, but I think it's something like $2.5 billion a day get paid out by Social Security. And that's why that money collecting the interest is part of what keeps that fund stable. So he's making the fund less stable by not having that money put into Social Security, which is why we're saying that he's actually cutting funds to Social Security and hurting the viability of it. And that's been repeated a lot lately and should be repeated.
Tom in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, we had this guy his butt in November, and he resigns. Can Pence pardon him?
Well, there'll be nothing to pardon by the time he would be out of office. I mean, given, the timeline and how any kind of courts or anything would work. So I think, that's a hypothetical that's not likely to happen. I would recommend, rather than worrying about lots of hypotheticals, is, find every ability that you have to help whatever candidates you want to help, whether it's Joe Biden or congressional candidates or legislative candidates, and do work for them now to help get out that vote. That'll help everyone who's running. And that's the best way to defeat Donald Trump, is to make sure that people who aren't happy with his policies get out and vote. And I really recommend people, we're at 90 some days left. It's not even 90, I think now. We just need to do everything we can to get out the vote and get people requesting absentee ballots in areas where they have to request it, and get those filled out and make sure we're ready for November.
Ron in Las Vegas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning. Who's going to certify the election and when it's going to happen?
That's a very open-ended question, Ron. And it happens again at the local level where they certify elections. However, I think what you're, maybe talking about is that the scenario where, where it happened in what was the year, Tom? I know you know.
1872 or 1876, I think.
1870. Okay, yeah.
Pretty sure.
But in general, elections are certified at the local and state levels, and I'm not sure what the rest of the intent was, Ron, but that's generally where elections are certified. And by when, I think you said, that is going to depend when the ballots are counted.
Yeah. Reggie in Pompano Beach, Florida, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Pocan, for the information on voting. But what do we have planned to inform other voters about some of these issues that you're commenting on?
Yeah, well, that's happening, everywhere, right? Like in my state, happens to be a swing state. We just had 2 polls this week that showed Joe Biden up 5 points and 6 points. But honestly, Hillary Clinton was up 5 points and 6 points about this time 4 years ago. So, we are a state that is a must-win state on almost every calculation. Well, fortunately, our Democratic Party of Wisconsin is doing an extraordinary job. Ben Wickler is our party chair, used to be the political director at Move On nationally. He's a great organizer. He's raising money. He's got he ran for the primary. That's why I knew we had poll watchers. He already ran part of the operation to make sure we're ready for November in August at a lower turnout election to be ready for it. So we're doing everything to make sure that people vote, that they're voting early and getting it, their ballots in and getting the messaging out. And that's going to happen, I would guess, by both campaigns and by political parties. And then, we just have to make sure then once those ballots are in, that, they're counted properly, and all those efforts are happening thanks to groups like Eric Holder's. But I'm confident that in almost every place that I know of in the country, especially that's a swing area, they have proper entities in place to make sure this is going to get done.
Nancy in Woodland, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, I'm just calling about accountability. What about holding Pompeo in contempt of Congress for not honoring subpoenas? And can you get an injunction against DeJoy?
I don't know on the injunction part, and that's, a lot of this is we're dealing with today. There's a letter going out. There was a meeting last week with the top leadership with the Postmaster General. So I think more will be coming out. He made some promises at that meeting, and then we're actually talking about those in the letter. I just don't know if the letter is officially out yet. As far as Pompeo or anyone else, yes, you can, but part of it is, this number, Tom, I kind of figured out, and I don't think we've ever said this on air before. You have 435 members of Congress, plus members of Congress and territories, plus U.S. senators. Just the House is where I calculated the numbers. We roughly have about 17 staff per office. Since we're all working remotely, including our staff, that's over 7,500 locations around the country we're operating Congress out of, just the House. Take the Senate, and you're going to add another few thousand locations. And it's not like we can just do a hearing and hold someone in contempt as easily, given some of the reality of COVID. Like everything else, it's having some impact on what we are able to do. Right now, the priority is getting this COVID bill done because people need help now. We've got to make sure the Postal Service is part of that help, and it's one of our top priorities as Democrats, not because of the elections, but because it's the right thing to do. It's in the Constitution. We need to do that. So I think, while there's a lot of things that, if you had a perfect world and we were back functioning in a way that we used to, that we might be able to do. But right now, it is a different situation, and we're going to have to prioritize. And the prioritizing right now is around the COVID relief bill and the post office and helping people who are unemployed at no fault of their own, helping the small businesses that lost their demand, helping the frontline workers to be safe and healthy as they take care of us, and helping the local and state governments that are providing these services have funds to continue to be able to do such.
Yeah. Great. I hope that all comes to pass. This is such a weird time. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Middays with Mark on your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Mike in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Representative Pocan. When is the United States or the Congress going to declare a day of memory, a memorial, such as what Spain did about a month ago? It was a beautiful ceremony. Their king got up, they exchanged white roses. I mean, it was just really touching. But when are we going to...
Is that for people who died of COVID, Mike? Is that what you're talking about? Mike?
Yes. When people have died of COVID, who are still facing that, the media is avoiding showing people in hospitals, and we just really need to keep the attention on the ball. And the other countries are doing that. I watch them every day in their newscasts.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sure at some point, obviously, we're going to be doing memorials to the hundreds of thousands of people, which it very likely will be, that have died in the United States of COVID. But right now, we just have to make sure that people aren't dying of COVID. And part of that is, getting the testing supplies, the PPEs, et cetera, out to our local and state governments that are providing these tests, getting the contact tracers so that we're finding someone who's positive. We can get a hold of people who they have had contact with, isolate those folks, make sure that people are wearing masks. I mean, right now, those are the main things we have to do. As a country, under the leadership of Donald Trump, we've failed miserably on this. Every step he's done pretty much the wrong thing, and that's why our numbers are so different than the rest of the world. But right now, our focus has to be on getting those numbers down, making sure people aren't continuing to get this and spread it. And that is one heck of a job that's left to do.
Kim in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, team. I respect both of you very much. I was wondering if you could tell us anything about the meetings I hear that the Bernie people and Biden people have been having. Also, I want to say I'm a proud Teamster and proud frontline worker during all of this.
Well, thank you for that, Kim, and I'm a proud painter and allied trade member myself. You've got an amazing member of Congress from Seattle, Pramila Jayapal, who's my co-chair on the Progressive Caucus. And, she was part of a process they had with Biden and Bernie folks on some policy issues, and they worked really hard over 6 weeks. And she was very happy with much of the result. I know a lot of people try to focus on the Democratic Party platform. I don't, because the party platform, I've rarely seen candidates adhere to anything that's related to it. But this separate process they had, this unity commission, I think is what it was called, really did work out some great things around issues. And she was very satisfied. She was largely involved on the healthcare aspect of it. AOC was involved on environmental and others. So I know that there have been a lot of meetings, and that when I've talked to people in the Bernie world that I was active with in his campaign, people seem to be very satisfied that they think on policy there's some very good things that will move forward when Joe Biden wins.
Yeah, and I apologize for my awkward bringing up Medicare for All in the beginning. My point was that Kamala Harris is one of, I think, only 3 Democratic candidates for president, major Democratic candidate, who had ever at any point acknowledged that Medicare for All was a good thing and could be viable. And I'm encouraged by that. Let's put it that way.
Yes, I agree.
Anyway. Yeah, thank you. Congressman Pocan, we'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Stick around. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings, Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Remy in Minneapolis, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for taking my call. I have a quick question. What measures will the Democratic Party take should we take over the House and the Senate that we don't repeat another Donald Trump? Thank you. I'll hang up.
Thank you.
Wow, that's a big question. I think part of it is going to be how we function, and there's going to be, I think, one of the biggest issues should we take the Senate, keep the House, and get the presidency. I think one of the biggest issues is going to be how they operate the rules of the Senate over the filibuster, because that could stop us from being able to repair much of the damage that Donald Trump has done. And I think that's going to be an important debate. How you stop a future Donald Trump, I think the media in many ways made Donald Trump, right? Every day he got all that free press during those primaries, and he really, ran as that reality show star, and it had an appeal. I don't know if legislatively there's anything we can do to stop a Republican running in a primary, but I think what we can do is how we are able to act and repair the damage done and move forward on policy. I think a key fight will be on how the filibuster is handled in the U.S. Senate.
Sandy in Sterling, Colorado, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, I would like to know where the Equal Rights Amendment is at this time, because we need it passed yesterday with a VP that's hopefully going to be a female, that the church thinks that women are subservient to men. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, Sandy, that's one of those things we got to add to our list when we have a president and hopefully a Senate and a House. We need to keep that. We're so close, the number of states that are left to ratify. And that is something I think important and should be a priority when we win in November.
James in Lakewood, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Gentlemen, we are totally under attack to include the unions. But what I was concerned with was the left wing being incarcerated in all the red states just to take their votes away before the elections. I witnessed to this, and it is a big problem with the voting bloc on the left.
So your question is about the voting rights of prisoners, Congressman?
Yeah, well, I think what he was saying is he thinks people are being arrested now, I thought is what he was saying, and I was a little confused.
Oh,
but
maybe.
If it is,
yeah.
There's no. Yeah, I mean, but I'm not exactly sure, because that's what I understood it as. But to your question, Tom, which is actually one I can answer better, is that is one of those issues that, again, when we have a Senate, a House, and a president, should be at the top of any list. I mean, we need to restore those voting rights to people. It's essential. We need to get it right. Florida did it, and then they didn't quite do it right. But still, a lot more people are going to be able to vote now who need to have a voice if you want them to be part of society, and that should be a priority moving forward.
Brian in Granville, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon. We now have two extremely conservative members of the Democratic Party on the ticket. What's on offer for progressives that we want to see?
Well, Brian, I would first of all disagree with your contention. I don't think they're both very conservative members of the Democratic Party. If we had Senator Manchin and Mr. Lipinski from Congress on, I would say you have two extremely conservative members of the Democratic Party. I think Joe Biden is more of a moderate. I definitely think that. And I think Kamala Harris is more your traditional liberal. And so there's a lot that we agree with them on that they will advocate for and move forward for president. So, don't get, lost on you don't agree with her on, a 2% of the issues when there's 98% you agree with her on, or Joe Biden on. I wanted Bernie to win, right? That's where my heart and values were. But you know what? Bernie and I are fighting as hard as we can to make sure that Joe Biden is elected, because we know it's a much better alternative than Donald Trump. And I would recommend everyone do that.
Congressman, we just have a minute left here till the end of the hour. I'm curious your thoughts on what we should be doing going forward, what we should be looking at this week, where we should be focusing our activism, and how we should best be exercising that.
I think this is already happening, but I would ask people to continue to be very outspoken on two things: the Postal Service and on the COVID bill. We need relief for people. Call your members of Congress and the Senate. I know last couple of weeks, Postal Service has been the number one call that we've gotten in my office. So I know that people are rightfully agitated about it, but we need to make the Republicans feel the heat so that Donald Trump can't, for Donald Trump's own sake, because that's the only thing he ever takes care of, is Donald Trump, get away with something. We need to put that heat on the Republican Senate and Republican members of Congress on both the COVID bill and the Postal Service. And I really, if you haven't called in a week or two, your member of Congress, now is the time to make that call. And if you've never
especially if they're a Republican,
call for the first time. Yeah, Republican. Right. And also the Democrats, although honestly, we know that we're fighting for these things. It's Republican members of Congress need to feel the heat.
And that number for Congress is 202-224-3121. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Of course. Thank you, Tom, as always.
Thank you. Always great talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to talk with Charlie Sykes about reinventing the Republican Party right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election, when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in sum, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. "That was some weird S-word," former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Threshold.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So back 4 years ago in 2016, Charlie Sykes, after 25 years as a conservative radio talk show host, stepped down from that gig. He's also a well-respected and well-published author. He's the author of 9 books: A Nation of Victims, Dumbing Down Our Kids, The Hollow Men, The End of Privacy, A Nation of Moochers. Most recently, How the Right Lost Its Mind, which came out right after 2017. But in 2016, he wrote a piece for the New York Times titled Where the Right Went Wrong, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. He talks about conservatives actually believe things about free trade, balanced budgets, character, and respect for constitutional rights. I have been wanting for some time to have a thoughtful conversation with a Republican or former Republican about how the Republican Party can go forward. And I'm very happy that Charlie is with us today. He's the founder and editor-at-large of The Bulwark. The thebulwark.com is the website, a news site. And of course, the author of How the Right Lost Its Mind. Charlie, and you can tweet him at Sykes Charlie, Sykes Charlie. Charlie, welcome to the program, and thanks for joining us. First of all, are you still a Republican?
No, because I don't really know what it means other than being part of the Trump cult, and I'm definitely not part of the Trump cult.
Yeah, I get that. I grew up in a Republican household. My dad was a solid member of the Republican Party. I went door to door with my dad in 1964. I was 13 years old to campaign for Barry Goldwater. The year before that, my dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting, and I got John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, and I read it, and I was terrified that the communists were coming to take out the State Department. 3 years later, I was, getting arrested in East Lansing in anti-war protests with the SDS. So that was my transformation, and I've been pretty much on the left ever since. But I certainly understand the old Republican point of view, my dad's Eisenhower Republican point of view, who actually supported labor rights, supported a lot, supported Social Security. They hadn't bought into this, Charles Koch kind of libertarianism, and they just wanted things to go a little more slowly, and were, not screaming racist. My father was not a racist. I don't understand how the Republican Party can reinvent itself given kind of the subtext to so much of what's going on before. Let me just go through this and then give you as much time as you'd like to respond to it. Balanced budgets, which the Republicans have been talking about forever. I mean, if you go back to 1976, June Winiski wrote a piece for the Washington Post, or for the Wall Street Journal, called the Two Santa Claus Theory, in which he said that when Republicans are in office, when they hold the White House, they should spend money like drunken sailors, drive up the national debt so that when Democrats come into office, they can then scream about, balanced budgets and the national debt to force cuts in social spending, which is exactly what happened. Reagan tripled the national debt from $800 billion to $2.4 trillion, and every Republican president has exploded it. So it's like there was never really a care about balanced budgets on the Republican side. Character, I think, stands alone. I'm going through your list from your New York Times piece. Character, balanced budgets, respect for constitutional rights, and free trade. And the respect for constitutional rights historically was mostly the 10th Amendment, allowing states to have segregated schools and things. I mean, looking back on the Republican Party in the 50s, 60s, 70s, was it an illusion?
This is painful for me to listen to, all of this stuff, because and that's a great question. I've been going back and forth on this conversation with Stu Stevens, who has a new book called "It's All a Lie," whether or not it was all a Potemkin village, whether it was all fake. Look, I think there were people who actually believed in that. I think there were people who were quite sincere. I remember when I was on the air in Wisconsin, I probably had Paul Ryan on my show more than 100 times talking about the danger of the deficit and the danger of the national debt. And then you look at what they've actually done, and it's a legitimate question. Was this all just simply a kind of tribal virtue signaling? Because there's nothing left of many of those things. And you wonder whether or not these ideas were really just sort of a thin crust over something else that was going on. And I'll be honest with you, I still wrestle with all of this. I look at people that I've known for 20 or 30 years and I thought were decent, intelligent, principled people, and watch one after another how they've conformed themselves to Trumpism. And it's an extraordinary story on a human level, but it's also a dangerous story on a political level.
So, Charlie, yeah, I agree, and I think back, and my dad has passed away a decade ago or more, but I'm wondering, was he fooled? I mean, was an entire generation of Republicans fooled by basically racists and right-wing billionaires? And I'm increasingly thinking yes, which raises the question. It's a good thing to have an opposition party. I mean, that dynamism is the key to any functioning republic. And I want to have a Republican Party that can be the opposition to the Democratic Party, that has some integrity, and that actually, in the course of debates, it's one of the reasons I debate conservatives on this program constantly. In the course of those debates, issues they become more vivid. You begin to understand them in multidimensional ways. What would the principles be of a reinvented Republican Party, setting aside all this old rhetorical BS?
Well, I don't know. And by the way, I am skeptical about whether or not this party can reinvent itself. I think it's going to be a very, very long time. It will not snap back to any sort of reasonableness just simply because Donald Trump has left. I think we've got a real voter problem out there. So the other thing is, before I go into your question about the whole issue of racism, I think that a lot of us knew that it was out there, and you may consider this to be naive. We knew that there was the drunk at the end of the bar. We knew about the bigoted uncle and everything, but we thought that those were the fringe characters. This was maybe a recessive gene, but it wasn't. There were some of us who thought, maybe Jack Kemp and somebody like that, might represent a new, more compassionate conservatism. But I think that was the illusion. And I think it's one of those cases where the people, the best lacking all conviction, while the worst were full of passion and intensity. Because right now, there's no question about the Republican Party. I can't tell you what percentage of Republican voters are in fact racist or have racist ideas, because you can't look into someone's heart. But there's no question about it. The vast majority of Republicans are willing to tolerate racism. And I think that's an objective statement when you watch what the president is saying, when you watch what he's tweeting even this morning. If you look at that and you go, yeah, I'm okay with that, well, then you are willing, by definition, to tolerate racism. So that's where we are at right here. So this complicates the issue of what are these principles. Look, I think in the push and pull of politics, there are, I do think that there's, the possibility of a center-right, center-left coalition that will talk about a politics of decency, that will push back against assaults on free speech, that will try to be as inclusive as possible, that will point out that, yes, there are tremendous overreaches and inequalities in terms of the economy, but let's not completely throw out the concepts of free markets and the ability of people to control their own destiny. So I do think there's also room for the voice of those who do not believe that every problem needs to be solved by government, and that centralized bureaucratic government is the most efficient solution to all of this. But that's going to be a back and forth.
Charlie, if I can, forgive me.
Yeah. No.
Doing the show remotely here, we've got hard breaks. Can you stick around for a little while?
Absolutely.
Great. I'd love to continue this conversation. We've got a 4-minute break here, and then, but we can talk during the break. Hang on just a second. Charlie Sykes is with us. His most recent book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. He's also the host and the Bulwark podcast, as well as the Bulwark website.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program,
which is thebulwark.com. We'll be right back with more of Charlie Sykes. And welcome back. Charlie, I don't know if my producer laid out our clock to you, but we have lost SiriusXM and our commercial stations, but we're still with Free Speech TV and all of our Pacifica stations. So we still have, about half our audience. And this will last for 4 minutes, and then we'll come back. I've got to read a live read on the commercial side. You'll hear a 1-minute promo on the nonprofit side, and then we'll have another 5 or 6 minutes to talk until 28 at the bottom of the hour, if that's all right with you.
Excellent. That's perfect.
Great. So what I would like to do when we come back is actually go through some of these issue points. But for this conversation, and we can recap it very quickly when we rejoin our commercial affiliates, you said you're not sure that the Republican Party can even be rescued.
No.
We saw this in the 1820s when the Whigs collapsed, or the early 1830s, I guess. Are you envisioning something like that?
I don't know what's going. I probably not, but because it's so ingrained. I mean, I wish there was something like that that could happen. I think they deserve it, but I don't know. At this point, what I'll say probably is that, my time horizon is very, very limited. I just feel like the house is on fire right now. We need to put it out, and then we'll worry about the redecorating later. Confront the crisis that's right in front of us, and then we can debate policy.
Well, that crisis goes beyond the Republican Party. I mean, Donald Trump is doing the things that oligarchs do. I mean, the thing that freaks me out the most is that I've done, for years throughout the 80s and early 90s, I was doing international relief work all over the world, and I've been in a lot of countries that are run by dictators, tin pot dictators. And the main thing that they do once they gain power, however they gain power, is they then convert all of the various departments of government away from their primary function, whether it's, enforcing the law or administering elections or whatever it may be, delivering the mail. They change them from that being their primary focus to their primary focus being getting the autocrat reelected, because these countries still have elections. And I'm watching Donald Trump do that, and I have no recollection of any president, and I've written books about early American history. I'm very familiar with that, and I've been on this planet nearly 70 years. I have no recollection of anybody in my lifetime, or before that, for that matter, any president ever doing that, trying to change the purpose of the administrative portions of government. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely about that. I find it to be really alarming. And in fact, if you watch what's going on in Hungary and Poland and other places, you can see the creeping populist authoritarianism around the world, and he seems to be following that same pattern. So, very much the playbook. So yeah,
and it's a playbook independent of right or left. I mean, this was Hugo Chavez's playbook as well.
See, this is the problem, of course, of throwing around terms like fascist a lot in American politics, because now we have something that is very fascistic, and you want to say, okay, we didn't really mean that before. This is the real thing.
Right. So, do you think that that there are people in the Republican Party? Well, we'll continue this in just a moment. We're talking with Charlie Sykes. His website is The Bulwark. He also has a podcast, The Bulwark, BULWARK, thebulwark.com. And you can tweet him at Sykes Charlie, SYKES Charlie, and as well as Bulwark Online. We'll be right back. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. Here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag You're It. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Charlie Sykes on the line with us. For the next few minutes here, we're talking about the Republican Party reinventing itself. And Charlie, I think we're in agreement that this particular president, represents an existential threat to the concept of what Democrats typically refer to as democracy and Republicans as a republic. And Madison, of course, used the words interchangeably. Free trade, balanced budgets, character and respect for constitutional rights. Those were the values that you defined as being traditional conservative values. I think we can debate free trade. That's kind of a separate issue. Yeah. But by and large, these are things that I would say are probably American values as well. What are the specific policy points that, if the Republican Party is to reinvent itself, I've been calling for years, for example, for progressives to get inside the Democratic Party and take it over. I'm guessing that eventually good former Republicans are going to be calling for good former Republicans to get inside the Republican Party and take it over. What would be the cardinal principles, and what do those mean beyond the slogans? You want to pick a couple?
Well, yeah, I could. I mean, but I think I got to make it clear that my time horizon is very, very narrow here. I feel that I have a hard time thinking past the election. And I think what I mentioned to you before was the house is on fire. I want to put the fire out. I'll worry about the redecorating later. I want a party that actually respects the things that it claimed to respect before, like the rule of law, like character, like limitations on the power of government. I want to have a party that restores respect for those constitutional values that James Madison wrote about, as opposed to simply this tribal racialist, nativist front that we have right now. And I think it's going to be very difficult to do because, Donald Trump has caused a lot of damage, but he's also a symptom of something that was a pre-existing condition on the right. And I think that you have a media ecosystem on the right that is not interested in those policies and those ideas. It's more interested in power. It's more interested in playing these cards to divide us by race and gender and ethnicity. And I think that somehow we need to get past all of that. Because I think one of the things that I've realized over the last couple of years is that I thought that politics was about policy, and it is. But right now, I think it's more about values. And I can disagree with you on 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 specific policy issues, but I think that you are an honorable, decent, empathetic person, we can do business. And I think that that's kind of the point that those of us that are anti-Trump conservatives, that we're willing to suspend much of the ideological debate to try to get back to a point where we can actually work together as a system. Because we're in the middle of a national crisis, and I think you and I are roughly the same age. What's really striking about this national crisis is that we are not all in this together. We are not one America. We are two Americas. And I think that I want to see a party that gets back to being a spokesman for fundamental decency that may disagree on specific things, but at least will believe what it says. And right now you have a Republican Party that doesn't seem to believe anything other than the need to bow the knee to the Orange God King.
Yeah. It seems to me that the cancer at the core of our politics on both sides is big money, and that this comes out of the 1976 Buckley decision by the Supreme Court that if a billionaire wants to own a politician or even multiple politicians, that's free speech protected by the First Amendment. And then the Bellotti decision 2 years later that extended that right to corporations as well. That led to an avalanche of cash that led to Ronald Reagan walking into the White House in 1980. Is that something that the Republican Party could embrace, doing something about the corruption of politics by big money?
I think that's highly unlikely to come from Republicans, to be honest with you. And I think that is one of those balancing issues between free speech and money. But I will admit that this is one of the things that I've had my eyes open to, which is the role of the American oligarchy in driving the political parties. It's not just an imbalance of wealth; it is a dramatic imbalance of political power.
Well, Jerry Ford embraced restricting money in politics.
Right. No, and I think at a certain point, though, it's out of the bag. But there has to be something that needs to be done about it, because a handful of people in this country are driving a lot of the things that we're talking about. And when I was very much part of the conservative movement, I remember saying to people, if people actually knew how it worked, they would, let me put it this way, it's worse than they think it is in terms of the influence and the power and the clout of the oligarchy. By the oligarchy, I mean, a handful of billionaires who determine not just who gets elected, but who gets to run the think tanks, what is acceptable, what's happened to the conservative media, how many of those publications have become pro-Trumpy because the people writing the checks for them have required them to be. So, Tom, it's worse than you think it is.
Yeah, I believe it. Charlie Sykes. Charlie, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's great talking with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Charlie is the editor-at-large at The Bulwark, thebulwark.com. He's also the host of the podcast, The Bulwark Podcast, and his most recent book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And there's a lot of news and a lot for the calls. Also, what do you think about Kamala Harris? I'm very encouraged. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. And but you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands, and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book. A Democracy in America by de Tocqueville.
On this week's Science Revolution, is a drug maker sitting on a possible COVID-19 cure just due to greed? Dr. Stephen Enstrop, chief scientist for Polar Bears International, is here. Could polar bears be lost by 2100? Food and Water Watch's Tony Corbo dissects Cory Booker's bill to protect meat packers and why it's important. In Geeky Science, we'll talk about why the coronavirus vaccine may not work well for obese people and how that's a big problem. And lastly, Michelle Obama speaks about anxiety during the pandemic and what we can all do. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly. Remember the Boston Tea Party? to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Apparently, Tucker Carlson thinks it's really funny to mispronounce people's names, and he kept mispronouncing Kamala Harris's name, like, intentionally, because it was funny. George Takei tweets out, "Oh, yes, that's very funny, Tucker, mispronouncing people's name. What rhymes with Tucker?" Oh, my God. I can't believe I went there. Anyway, the GOP... we were talking with Charlie Sykes about the Republican Party, and this is where the Republican Party is at. There is a candidate, his name is Madison Cawthorn, and he is running for a Republican seat in North Carolina, and and he just won the primary. And he first, here's the story, this is from Huffington Post, a Republican congressional candidate in North Carolina first archived, then reinstated, and that's the key to this, I'll get to that in just a second, photos on his Instagram account from a 2017 vacation to Adolf Hitler's Eagle's Nest retreat. After a recent news article about them. Madison Cawthorn is the guy's name. In the caption for the Post, he wrote, "The vacation house of the Fuhrer," using, the Fuhrer, not an official title, that's the word of, that basically means beloved leader. He said, "Seeing the Eagle's Nest has been on my bucket list for a while, and it did not disappoint." So, the guy who's running against him, the Democrat who's running against him, Mo Davis is his name, who's a former military prosecutor. He tweeted or replied on Cawthorn's Instagram post saying, "Hitler's vacation retreat is not on my bucket list." But what's interesting, and this guy, this Republican who did this, Cawthorn, he started a real estate company called SPQR, which is apparently a term popular among white nationalist groups. He uses an early version of the American flag, which has been, the Anti-Defamation League says, has been, quote, appropriated by far-right militias, end quote. And what I thought was interesting was, he had these pictures up of him, smiling, laughing, having a great time, a wonderful time at Hitler's vacation retreat. And then he gets called out in the press, and he takes the pictures down. And then a couple days go by, and he puts the pictures back up again and says, "I don't cower to the mob. The new Republican Party that I represent will fight back against liberal lies." So apparently, Hitler being a mass murderer is a liberal lie. I don't know what else that means. But this is, as he said, the new Republican Party that I represent. This is Madison Cawthorn, this guy who's running in North Carolina for the U.S. House of Representatives against Mo Davis, a Democrat. This is our Republican Party. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So anyway, all that said, let me pick up your phone calls here. Bart in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Bart, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Excuse me for the morning cough. But in any case, I have a simple question. And, while the two houses in Congress and the White House were playing a virtual child's game called pickup sticks, something got lost in the shuffle. What happened to the $1,200 relief check?
That was a one-off. That was the first stimulus. And that was back in March when we thought that the whole thing was going to only last a month or two until it just kind of, we didn't know if it was going to go seasonal or not, if it was going to be like the common cold or the flu. Obviously all those hopes were dashed, but the first stimulus, or the first relief, I guess you would call it, was the $1,200 check that Trump wanted his name attached to. Then the Democrats came up with the CARES Act, which said we're going to, instead of doing $1,200 one-off, we're going to do $600 a week, basically until the end of this legislation, which was 2 weeks ago, the end of last month. And now the Democrats are saying we want to continue the $600 a week well into January or February of next year. And the Republicans are saying, well, Trump is saying, I'll give you $300, and in giving you that money, FEMA will run out of any money to respond to hurricanes or wildfires. And the Republicans are starting to freak out now because they're realizing that that's stupid and it doesn't work. And the law requires all FEMA money going to the states to be matched 25% by the states. And the Republican Governors Association has said to Trump, we're not going to do this. So, Mnuchin is out there desperately trying to negotiate a deal now with Pelosi and Schumer. And they're saying, we passed this thing in May. In May, we passed a $3 trillion HERO Act that funds the elections, funds the post office, gives people $600 a month until January or February, basically solves this whole collection of problems. And the Republicans are like, nah, we're not going to do that because that's just, too generous. You're giving people too much money. And the Financial Times this morning had a fascinating analysis that it's been less than 2 weeks or fewer than 2 weeks, I guess, since the stimulus, the $600 a week, ran out. And already in the metrics that are measurable, the short-term, real fast metrics, like, for example, the main one that they're using is cell phone tracking data to see if people are visiting retail stores and if they're leaving their homes. Are they shopping, basically? And what they're finding, Bart, is that they are not. So this is going to further depress the economy, and that also has Republicans freaked out because they know that the worse the economy gets, the more the voters will punish the party in power, which obviously is the Republicans. So, I hope I answered your question, Bart. Thanks a lot for asking it. Aaron in Carmichael, California. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Hi. So I wanted to talk to you about possibly getting the president a line item veto, and that would be for all presidents, because Paul Ryan mentioned that to Obama way back when he was president. I think it would be good because then we could actually vote for the person and not for the party. We could kind of get away from parties altogether.
Yeah, I'm ambivalent about that. The problem with a line item veto, and we've certainly seen this in the states that have it, is that it massively increases the power of the executive branch. It gives the president the ability to basically participate in the legislative process. And that is something that the framers of the Constitution were very clear should never, ever happen. Congress has the sole power to appropriate and spend money, and then the Congress takes that appropriated money and supervises the agencies that do the spending of it, whether it's the FDA or the USDA or whatever it may be. And with a line item veto, you are weakening substantially, radically weakening the power of Congress to define the parameters of that. And so, respectfully, Aaron, unless you can convince me otherwise, I would not go along with that.
Well, the only thing I could think of is that the Congress, so like the minority party, could say, hey, they line item vetoed this item out, and they could use it as a campaign strategy against whoever the sitting president was at the time.
The problem with that, and again, I applaud your thinking on this. It's like we're all trying to figure out ways to make our republic work a little better. But the problem with that is that most people, while they may know the big stuff, like, hey, Congress just passed the military appropriations bill, and personally, wouldn't it be cool if a president had the ability to do line item vetoes in that, because so much of it is just pork, But the fact of the matter is that if the president vetoed some of the items in that bill, most people will never know that. They just don't pay that much attention to how, to the nuts and bolts of governance. That's something that maybe 5 or 10% of Americans know about, whereas maybe 40 or 50% of Americans would know the substance of legislation that has been passed and essentially the substance of the of the president's opposition to it. This works for both parties. And I think that the big lesson that we've learned from the Trump presidency, Aaron, is that largely as a consequence of 9/11, but also as a result of a lot of the changes that Reagan made, the presidency has acquired way more power than it should have. And so I get how seductive, maybe that's the wrong word, how appealing a line item veto is. Hey, somebody should have the ability to have fiscal responsibility or rationality. I think that we need to go back to first principles, and separation of powers is the first among the first principles.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Linda in Pasadena, California. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching, for watching us on YouTube.
Well, hi, Tom. So what I'm wondering, I thought that was the Democrats through Mark Pocan. I just think it's a very weak response. But I wonder,
response to what?
To the threat against the post office crisis.
Oh, the post office. Okay. Sorry,
but anyway, but I was wondering, I think it was Jimmy Carter that brought in the United Nations team to observe the election. Yeah. Can we do something like that?
In the election of 2004, the UN tried to provide observers to the United States, and there was another international group that was trying to provide observers. I forget the name of it. And then the Carter Center wanted to provide observers. And the Bush administration basically said, no, we're not going to allow that. And so, and the problems were all in red states. Those were the states where there's massive voter disenfranchisement and active and aggressive, poll intimidation. And Republican governors across the country said no. And in fact, several legislatures, I believe Ohio was at the top of that list with Ken Blackwell as Secretary of State at the time, actually made it illegal for poll workers, poll watchers, to get close enough to the polls to watch the polls. And so, first of all, we'd have to undo some of those state laws. And secondly, we'd have to change the position of the federal government. But I agree with your sentiment. I completely agree with your sentiment, and I think that we need something like that. But what exactly it might be? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, if they won't allow it if it's by governor by governor, if they won't allow it in the red states, at least we could get observers to ensure the blue state vote goes through, couldn't we?
Yeah. With few exceptions, the blue states are pretty clean. I mean, you've got secretaries of state who are interested in having actual elections and making sure everybody, including Republicans, can vote and vote easily. And I mean, look at Washington State. Well, you're in California. I mean, increasingly that's been the case in California, right down to things like, a nonpartisan commission to redraw congressional districts, ending gerrymandering in California, which is a huge big deal. And change the makeup of your assembly, your state assembly, and your Senate. Go ahead.
But just letting you know that in the 2016 election and in certain local elections, we have had our differences with the voter registration people and the voter counting people. But anyway, I think that we need to do something, and I understand that you say that we can't have a civilian corps that delivers the mail, but can we have a civilian corps that watches the mail, or that, I don't know, I need to get active. Personally, I just feel like I have to do something, and I want to know what to do.
Yeah. Well, be an activist on social media, be an activist with your local Democratic Party. They're doing things. They're just doing them virtually. Indivisible.org is doing some really great stuff around the country. With regard to the post office, we just need to be, yelling and screaming, and as Mark Pocan said at the end of the show, if you don't have a Republican representing you, Linda, in California, but tell all your friends in red states to call the congressional switchboard at 202-224-3121 and absolutely raise holy hell with the Republican members of the House and Senate. This is just so wrong. Linda, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mario in Berwyn, Illinois. Hey, Mario, what's on your mind today?
Sir, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to emphasize to people out there to speak about the situation that we are. Since these imposters in the White House, I use the right flag, our flag upside down, and I try to talk to veterans and people, and they are so much ignorant about the situation that we are. We have to talk about the situation that we are. We cannot stay quiet. We have to every single minute to talk about the situation, what this person has been doing, and so many ignorant people. They are out there. Try to make emphasis of this person, and most of them, they are Anglo Republicans of this country. We cannot stay quiet. We have to talk. Yeah. We have to talk and talk.
Yeah, I agree. And even when it's uncomfortable, and even when people are treating you poorly, we need to continue these conversations. It's particularly important to notice what's going on. I mean, the number of thank you, Mario. The number of foreign trolls that I'm seeing in my Twitter feed is just mind-boggling. We all need to be vigilant about that. Katie in Clovis, New Mexico. Hey, Katie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. The coronavirus has obstructed my ability to find work. I was an unemployed student who was leaving school, and I was just starting to look for a job when the coronavirus hit and everything closed down. I'm talking about the fact that the people who get $600 a week, et cetera, or $400, it doesn't really matter, are all people on unemployment. The people who were not on unemployment, who were unemployed, just got $1,200. I am basically squatting, homeless, at a relative's house. He's paying for all my food. I had to take another degree basically to get student aid so I can get through this, and I'm going to have $100,000 to pay back when I get that done. So anyway, the part of the national communication about this should be that all these people have jobs, or they had jobs and they're getting unemployment. But there are many people out there who are not being counted who did not have jobs. What do you say about that? Or
who are eligible to enter the workforce because they just graduated from college, or they just left their parents' home. They're just transitioning into adulthood. And they're falling through the cracks. You're absolutely right, Katie. And on the other end of that, the other thing that hugely concerns me is that when the Republicans cut long-term unemployment from 99 weeks down to less than a year, now you've got people who are going to be rolling off unemployment, and that's going to be very, very difficult for them as well. Katie, we just need to keep talking to our politicians about this and essentially lobbying them, and that's why I keep giving out the number for Congress, 202-224-3121. Katie, I wish you the very best. Keep us up to date on how you're doing. Carl in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Carl, what's up?
Hey, thank you for taking my call, Tom. I wanted to make a statement and ask you a kind of a two-part question. I have never, ever considered the post office a governmental department that would become a problem for us that we had to deal with. It's probably the best loved department in the federal government. But I am really concerned that somebody who works for Trump saw the writing on the wall with all of the emphasis now being put on vote by mail. We have, in my personal belief, practically put all our eggs in one basket with this vote in the mail. We are praying.
At least half our eggs, yeah.
And we have to because of COVID-19. So my question is, what House, and I was going to ask this of the representative, but I didn't get in time. What House committee has oversight authority over the post office. Do you know by any chance?
I don't. I don't know if that would be government operations or Ways and Means, or if there's some committee, which appropriates the money, or whether there's some specific committee. That's a damn good question, Carl. I'll try to remember to ask that of Congressman Kana or Congressman Pocan the next time they're on, because or you could call your member of the House and ask them at 202-224-3121. But I don't know the answer to that. But I agree. We should be. In fact, I will look that up after we get off the air today, because that's the committee. Members of that committee are the people that we should be lobbying. Carl, thank you for that. Jim in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Postal sorting machines are being removed from offices. This is
I know the head of the Postal Workers Union in the state of Iowa just mentioned yesterday that's happening there. Yeah,
all over. It was on NPR. They're sabotaging it. Something has to be done. This is a hair on fire moment.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And that's thank you, Jim. Thank you for the call. And that's why Congressman Pocan said, call if you live in a red state, or if you have a Republican representing you in Congress. Right now is the moment to call 202-224-3121, which is the number for Congress. It's the switchboard for the House and Senate. And simply, and if you don't know who represents you in the House of Representatives, but you're pretty sure it's a Republican, just say, well, my zip code is 97305, and they'll look it up and they'll say, oh, you're represented by Joe Blow. Here, I'll put you through to his office. And then you write down Joe Blow's name, and when you get to the person on the other end, you say, I'm very concerned about the fate and future of the post office, and not just because of the vote. I get my medication this way, I pay my bills this way. I mean, this is crazy that they would kneecap the post office, the thing that Ben Franklin created in this country. They would kneecap that so that one guy, one oligarch, one billionaire oligarch can hold political power. This is breathtaking. Anyhow, we'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this, and a cool little geeky science story as well. So stick around as we hit the top of the hour here, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here, every day. Well, every weekday. Thom Hartmann with you. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by N.B. Turner. It's titled, Is China an Imperialist Country? And it's from a relatively Marxist point of view. I think you'll find it fascinating. This is from the introduction. It has long been known and understood that the entire world has been under the control of capitalist imperialism. For a time, a section of this world broke from it, beginning with the victory of socialism in Russia and continuing through the Chinese Revolution, constituting a socialist world. Yet in time, the socialist countries, through internal class struggles in politics and economics, were seized by capitalist conciliators and advocates, and then by capitalists themselves, who were largely within the ruling communist parties themselves. First in Russia and later in China, when these counter-revolutions and coups took place, there ensued a period of entry and integration into the world imperialist system. The Soviet Union, at first under the existing signboard of socialism, continued much of its established national and economic power relations into a new socialist imperialist bloc, socialist in name, imperialist in reality. The Russian capitalist imperialist attempt to maintain this bloc, or important sections of what had been part of this bloc and its historic allies, has continued in the years since the socialist signboard was discarded. In China, the defeat of the proletariat and the capitalist capture of state power after the death of the great revolutionary Mao Zedong have also led to a period of integration into the world imperialist system. China still operates under a socialist signboard, but has conducted itself unambiguously as a capitalist power. Before the last decade, especially since the demise of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was commonly seen as the sole superpower to which all other powers had to defer. The system which the U.S. had designed at the end of World War II was global in scope and to some more democratic in appearance than the old colonial empires. But it was built around the elitist privilege of power and authority, meaning the U.S. as superpower was at the centerpiece of the controls. But in the last decade, the imperialist world system is not what it used to be. Throughout the world, corrupt and comprador regimes have faced significant and often unprecedented mass popular opposition movements, which have revealed the deep instability of the old neo-colonialist arrangements. Even in the EU, the product of imperialist designs to supplant the historic internecine battles, there has emerged ever-deepening crises and conflicts and movements to assert nationalist interests against one another. Against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, the imperialist system was directed by the U.S., has launched wars such as in Iraq and Afghanistan at huge cost, trillions of dollars, and immeasurable losses in political credibility and imperialist authority, as neither war has won any of the U.S.'s objectives. These clear failures at the hand of the largest and most powerful military force in the world do not bode well for maintaining the U.S.'s hegemonic domination of the world's imperialist system. And the economic and financial crises of the last half-decade or more have stirred not only deep discontent, resentment, and popular political opposition within the ranks of the U.S.'s reliable allies, but it has brought to the fore the imperialist anti-U.S. challenges from other major powers, specifically China and Russia. Forces worldwide are studying these changes and considering how they must change the set of options at hand. The all-too-prevalent view that U.S. imperialism is so powerful, so dominant, and so capable of manipulating all manner of forces and bending them to its will has been, and continues to be, a dangerous twisting of reality. The sole superpower in this view has been attributed with omnipotent features that defy effective challenge, that reflect a supposedly skillful control of contradictions and crises that afflicted earlier empires, and that has a boundless ability to disguise its malevolent work. If it were true, it would be a remarkable development in human history. Indeed, it would be, as once touted in the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union in bloc by Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. That is, the end of historical conflict and systemic changes. It would be an expression of the boastful and fanciful capitalist post-Mao motto, Tina, there is no alternative to capitalism. There are others who assert that the U.S. is not so omnipotent and that it is in decline and maybe failing, but that the U.S. and its close allies constitute the only imperialism that matters, and that if all its detractors, victims, opponents, and its imperialist rivals band together, liberation will truly be achieved with the demise of U.S. imperialism. This view also holds that whenever big powers like China or Russia rise in opposition to the U.S., they deserve the support and applause from progressive and revolutionary forces. Holding this view are a variety of forces who cling to the notion that the Cold War division of the world is still extant, and that popular protests in recent years from Libya to Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela, as well as Brazil and Turkey, Iran, even inside Western China, are all examples of U.S. meddling and desperate interference. This view holds that without such U.S. manipulation and interference and disruption, the people would, by and large, be happy or passive. This is by any measure an amazing claim, denying the existence of class contradictions and struggles within each of these countries, and making it appear that the conspiratorial powers of the U.S. to manipulate events are unparalleled in reach and effectiveness. In practical political terms, this view distorts the basic reality. Is China an imperialist country? Everything into one common family. A remarkable book written in 1851, League of the Iroquois, Lewis Henry Morgan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. You know, around the same time that Donald Trump issued an executive order to slash the revenue to Social Security, a Republican sheriff in Florida required police and people who come to the police station to take off their masks. This is the face of the Republican Party. Greedy, petty, angry, and stupid. And to that latter point, Donald Trump has a new COVID advisor. Sure enough, he's got the guy's name is Dr. Scott Atlas. He's a radiology guy. He's a former chief of neuroradiology at Stanford University. This guy regularly appears on Fox so-called news. He has said on Fox News, and this is where Trump learned of him. Trump basically gets most of his people from Fox News. Atlas said it doesn't. This is what he said on Fox News. This is from a piece on Raw Story right now. He said it didn't matter how many cases there were in the United States and claimed that children under the age of 18, quote, have essentially no risk of dying and, quote, almost never transmit this deadly virus. He also claimed that teachers at high risk, quote, should know how to protect themselves, quote, end quote, and basically blamed outbreaks in southern states on Black Lives Matter protests and on immigrants. So Trump says, well, he's our new guy. And I think this is the guy that's going to replace Deborah Birx and Anthony Fauci. So get ready, another nut job coming your way. But this is, like I said, this is the face of the GOP now. Republicans, if you look at policy, Republicans have fought Social Security since it was created in 1935. They fought Medicare and Medicaid since they were created by Lyndon Johnson in the late 1960s. They oppose voting rights for minorities. They want to insert themselves between women and their doctors. They're trying to destroy American families by cutting education, food support, and access to good housing. They even oppose the right of working people to unionize so that they can have decent pay and good benefits. And they oppose the right of average Americans to send their kids to good public schools. They're actively, in fact, working to destroy our public school system. Trump is bragging about this, by the way, tweeting out to white, quote, suburban housewives that he's going to make sure that none of that low-income housing that made Jared Kushner rich will ever be built in their neighborhoods. In many ways, Trump is the embodiment of the modern Republican Party, a bigoted, angry, sexist, stupid white man who pretends to be a billionaire. And as if to emphasize this, he's called Kamala Harris, the first African-American and South Asian woman to ever be on a presidential ticket, nasty. He called her a nasty woman. He called, when Hillary Clinton was the first woman to ever run for president in the United States on a major party platform, he called her nasty. This is the thing that Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, I believe she's the first female Speaker of the House, I'm pretty sure. He called her nasty. Now, as they point out over at the top of DemocraticUnderground.com, he doesn't say that about all women. Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in prison for child sex trafficking, Trump said, I wish her well. Right, she's not nasty. But this is the Republican Party that Donald Trump has reinvented. And history and the intrinsic goodness of human nature have moved beyond the Republican Party's century-long opposition to working people, voting rights, and a strong safety net. I think this country, although, right now the Republicans have power and control, they control the Senate, even though they only about 35% of America voted for Republicans for the Senate. But because you've got so many small, low population states that each have 2 senators, and D.C. and Puerto Rico don't have senators, the Republicans control the Senate. But I think that their time has gone. And, which again raises the question. I mean, if the Republican Party doesn't reinvent itself, it's going to go the way of the Whigs. And what's going to replace it? A libertarian party funded entirely by Charles Koch and his friends? I mean, it appears that the best the Republican Party has to offer right now, as we're looking forward, to future years, would be either the fascist Tom Cotton, who's writing op-eds in the New York Times about how American soldiers should be assaulting protesters in the street, or a billionaire, Mitt Romney, who basically holds all those positions, just wants to do it in a more old-fashioned way. How do you define Mitt Romney? But broadly, America is rejecting sexism and misogyny. America is rejecting racism and hatred and otherizing. It's not going to stop the Republicans from trying it. Already on Facebook and on Twitter, there are memes out there saying, well, Kamala Harris, is she really an American citizen? Her dad was from Jamaica and her mom was from India. Her mom, by the way, this is an amazing story. Her mom came to the United States from India, not as a child, but as a young adult, in order to get her PhD at the University of California. She came to the United States to get her PhD. Or maybe it was Stanford, whatever college. But, aren't these the kind of immigrants that Donald Trump says he wants? Oh, wait a minute. Her skin is darker than Norwegians. I forgot. But they're already doing the birther thing. Well, maybe they're calling her an anchor baby. It's like, really? No, she can run for president. She can be president. She was born in the United States. The 14th Amendment says if you're born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen, and you have to be a U.S. citizen at 35 years old to run for president. But they are going after her already with these racist attacks that Donald Trump used and championed, cheerleaded, spearheaded against Barack Obama for years and years. And I am strongly of the opinion that racism, sexism, and selfishness and greed, the values of the Republican donor class, are yesterday's values. And that America is going to become a much better place in the future. I'm reminded that Hillary Clinton was ahead of Donald Trump 4 years ago, pretty much exactly as much as Joe Biden is ahead of him right now. And so we can't take anything for granted. That said, if enough of us mobilize, if enough of us vote, if you live in a state that does not have automatic, mail voting like my state of Oregon here, if you live in a state where you have to apply for an absentee ballot, do so now. It is so important that we all vote in this election because I think that as long as the Republican Party, the GOP, continues to hang on to these values, this is at the core of the Republican Party right now. And frankly, I believe it always was, or at least all the way back to the 1920s when the modern Republican Party was birthed with the election of Warren Harding in the election of 1920. And immediately he goes in 1921, and within 4 years they had cut the top income tax rate from 91% down to 25%. That was 1924, I believe, that they did that. And, Harding ran on a platform of deregulating business, deregulating the banks, deregulating Wall Street, which they did. And it led to the Roaring '20s, when rich people got insanely rich as the stock market just exploded and working people got screwed. Very Republican, right? Very Republican. So, we've got a big job to do. But I think all of us setting aside our internecine battles and uniting around this ticket of Biden-Harris and working with progressive candidates, I think this is really important stuff. By the way, I got, thanks to Sue Nethercutt, I have the information on the congressional committee that has oversight of the post office. I'll share that with you right after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the weapons of mass deception. And welcome back. Don in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm good this morning. Been following the discussion, and looking forward to getting the information about the Oversight Committee for the Post Office. I can see there's a lot of interest in this issue, and I've been trying to think of a way. I'll give
you a tip. It's called the Oversight and Reform Committee. But anyhow, continue.
Very good. Oversight and Reform in the House?
Yeah, and I'm going to name all the members and everything when we come back on the other side of this break. But what was
very good? Well, like several of my friends, I've been trying to think of a way to support the post office without having to go through the, revenue channels at the Congress. So I went out and bought a bunch of sheets of stamps, and I got so many stamps now I'm ready for Christmas. But I had the idea. I know in Washington State, we don't require postage for mail-in ballots. And I think there are a number of other states, I think Oregon might be included, that similarly don't require postage when you mail in a ballot. I'm wondering what would happen. I wondered what would happen if we would have fixed stamps to the ballots as kind of a tip for the post office.
I'm not certain of this, Don, but I used to run an ad agency in Atlanta, and we used to drop about 2.5 million pieces of mail a year. And actually, it was more like 2.5 million pieces of mail a month. We were mailing, we were doing seminars all over the country. We did 180 seminars a year for people in business on marketing and advertising. And my recollection is that when you have postage-paid envelopes, not only do you have that logo that everybody's familiar with up in the upper right-hand corner where it says, first-class mail paid, and you've got the bars underneath it, but that down on the bottom, underneath the address line, the return, to which you're returning that envelope, there is a barcode or a code, but I believe it was a barcode, and that is read by the automatic sorting machines in the post office. So those machines would be looking for that barcode. They would not even notice that the postage was on there, if my understanding of how the post office works is correct. Now, I'm not inside the post office, but I know that we have listeners who are letter carriers and people who work in the post office, and if I'm wrong on that, maybe somebody can correct me. But A, I don't think it would matter. I don't think the sorting machines would even notice that you'd put a stamp on because of that barcode. And B, anytime you're mailing anything, you're increasing the costs of the post office. The only time you increase their revenue is when you actually buy the stamps. So I've got a couple of stamps here, but if I put them on a letter, and that causes, in particular, if it causes the post office to have to pull that thing out of the sorting order and hand stamp it or something like that, it's going to slow things down even more. So I'm not sure that that's the solution. Again, hoping that somebody who knows this stuff or works for the post office can call in and correct me if I'm wrong. Does all that make sense, Tom?
So it could end up having a negative effect, sort of.
If I'm correct about this stuff, yeah, and I know about it from the shipping, from the postal, dropping third-class mail and using first-class postage returned envelopes side of it. but I don't know from the being a postal worker side of it. But that's my sense of it. I don't think that there's any fix that would be that simple. But, we'll see. Keep listening.
I had a follow-up. How about you do it as a charity? You sell stamps to people who want to make the point by pasting it on their ballot.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Don. I can't hear you over the music. We'll be right back. You can help. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. You're it. Marvin here with you. There's a lot to share with you today. I've got a great geeky science story for you, too. I'm going to do that right after the bottom of the hour. But right now, I wanted to just give you some information, and then I'll pick up some more of your phone calls. The committee, Sue Nethercutt did the research on this while we were on the air. She does our newsletter and all kinds of other, and maintains HartmannReport.com and other things with our program. And God bless her. Sue is just, a wonderful person and does such great work. And she sent me, or she tweeted, that the committee that has oversight over the post office in the U.S. House of Representatives is the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. The chairwoman is Carolyn Maloney of New York. The ranking member is James Comer of Kentucky. And I'm just going to go through the list so that if you live in one of these states and if you recognize one of these names, if they represent you, your phone call to them or letter to them or email to them or fax to them or whatever you may do will have a lot more impact than somebody who doesn't live in the district. But even if you don't live in the district, you may want to just grab one of these names and contact them. Again, the number for Congress is 202-224-3121. So the chair and the ranking member are Carolyn Maloney and James Comer, Democrat and Republican. The Democratic members are Eleanor Holmes Norton, William Clay, Stephen Lynch, Jim Cooper, actually I should give you the states too. Norton of D.C., William Clay of Missouri, Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, Jim Cooper of Tennessee, Gerald Connolly of Virginia, Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois, Jamie Raskin of Maryland, Kwasi Mfume of Maryland, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his first name, Harley Ruda of California, Ro Khanna of California, that's interesting. We'll have to bring this up with him the next time he comes on the program. Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, John Sarbanes of Maryland, Peter Welsh of Vermont, Jackie Spear of California, Robin Kelly of Illinois, Mark DeSaulnier of California, Brenda Lawrence of Michigan, Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands, Jimmy Gomez of California, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Ayanna Presley of Massachusetts, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, and Katie Porter of California. Those are the Democrats. Here are the Republican members of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform that has oversight over the post office. Jim Jordan, Paul of Ohio, Paul Gosar of Arizona, Virginia Fox of North Carolina, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Jody Heiss of Georgia, Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, Gary Palmer of Alabama, Michael Cloud of Texas, Bob Gibbs of Ohio, Clay Higgins of Louisiana, Ralph Norman of South Carolina, Chip Roy in Texas, Carol Miller of West Virginia, Mark Green of Tennessee, Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota, Fred Keller of Pennsylvania, and W. Stube of Florida. So that's, as far as I can tell, that's a good starting point in terms of a pressure point for these issues with these people. So a place to start. And as I said, I'll get into our geeky science on the other side of the break here. Kitty in Delray Beach, Florida. Hey, Kitty, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom.
You have some post office information?
Yes, for my business, I've been shipping for 22 years. I ship all over the world. And we're a manufacturer, so we're actually bringing money into the country. And in all of these years, I've lost 2 packages, one in Australia and one in Russia, after 22 years. Starting around March, I have had such problems shipping overseas. We're almost considering not doing it because we're sending out products and they're doing chargebacks on us because they're not getting their packages. And I'm talking about 4 months later, they're not getting their packages.
Whoa.
And after all these years to never have problems and then all of a sudden get to the point where we're like, maybe we can't ship overseas anymore because we're actually we're spending the money, we're spending the shipping money, and we're doing it, and then they're doing chargebacks. I've had fights with customers, and I'm like, I can't track anything. I can't. And now, the way we resolved it is by saying to our customers, you have to pay the most expensive way to ship, which is the expedited or global express, which is so much more expensive now. And I said, other than that, I cannot guarantee when you will get your package, if you'll get it. I have never had that problem. I have always loved the post office. My husband's a veteran, and we would have even gotten discounts at, like, I think FedEx or UPS. And we still won't do it because the post office has been so reliable. You get free shipping material, free boxes. I mean, it's been wonderful. So for it to get like this, I know they're messing with it. There's just no question.
It's sabotage. Yeah,
yep.
It's clearly sabotage. Kitty, I hope that you will have an opportunity to call 202-224-3121 and share that story with your member of the House of Representatives and both of your senators. Both of your senators are Republicans. I don't know who represents you in the House.
I'm not really sure either, but I will definitely start making my phone
Marco
call.
Rubio and Rick Scott need to hear from you, and the number is 202-224-3121, because we have to raise hell with Republicans. As Mark Pocan said, Congressman Pocan, he said they need to feel the heat, the Republicans. The Democrats already know this is a crisis. Their hair is on fire. The Republicans are like, no big deal, and maybe I'll, not lose the
And we're
election.
A manufacturer. We're a manufacturer, American manufacturer.
There you go. Kitty, I wish you the very best. Keep us up to date on how things are going, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the call, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program, Talk Media for the sane still left among us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And on the other side of this break, before I pick up your calls, want to know how to reduce your risk of heart disease? I've got a fascinating one. Stick around.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number, the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, Quote, new research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest, end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
On this week's Science Revolution, is a drug maker sitting on a possible COVID-19 cure just due to greed? Dr. Stephen Anstrop, chief scientist for Polar Bears International, is here. Could polar bears be lost by 2100? Food and Water Watch's Tony Corbo dissects Cory Booker's bill to protect meat packers and why it's important. In Geeky Science, we'll talk about why the coronavirus vaccine may not work well for obese people and how that's a big problem. And lastly, Michelle Obama speaks about anxiety during the pandemic and what we can all do. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And for our Geeky Science today, this is an amazing story. The body has a molecule, it's called TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. And TMAO is a marker that things are going on inside your body that can lead to heart disease, if not being the thing itself. I don't understand all the details of exactly how TMAO works in this regard, but there was a fascinating article published, a study published in the August 11th issue of the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And they were looking at TMAO levels as well as blood cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight. And they were trying to figure out, what dietary factor will have a big influence on these things? Because TMAO means, higher TMAO levels, greater risk of a heart attack, and then, of course, blood cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight. We all know all the things that those are associated with. And so this was a 16-week study where they had people 2 meals a day eat either red meat or vegetarian meat, Beyond Meat or Impossible Burgers, basically, these plant-based meat products. And each group did it, half the group for 8 weeks would eat vegetarian burgers and the other half would eat the meat burgers, and then and vice versa for the second 8 weeks, and they compared them. 2 servings of meat or plant-based alternatives every single day for 16 weeks. And what they found, and I'm quoting from this, people with elevated TMAO have a 60% higher risk for adverse cardiovascular attacks, such as events such as heart attacks. And this from the study, the researchers observed that participants who ate the red meat diet during the first 8-week phase had an increase in TMAO, while those who ate the plant-based diet did not. They go on to say health benefits conveyed from plant-based alternatives extended to weight and levels of LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. Participants' level of LDL cholesterol, these are the people who were eating the vegan meat, the vegetarian meat. Participants' levels of LDL cholesterol dropped on average 10 milligrams per deciliter. That's, the score that they give you. Oh, your cholesterol is, 122. Well, it dropped by 10 points, basically, which is not only statistically significant, but clinically significant too, right? A measurable reduction in heart disease from cholesterol. In addition, participants lost 2 pounds on average during the plant-based portion of the diet. And they're still eating everything they want, as much as they want. They just basically went vegan. It's amazing. So, anyhow, our story for the day. Let's pick up some of your phone calls. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I had a question from an earlier caller that was talking about a line item veto and how that might not be such a good idea. But what if Congress was limited to one item per bill?
I'm in favor of that. And this is how it really was done until the 1980s.
Yeah, they couldn't hide all their grifter friends' ideas from these think tanks of, oh, well, let's hide this in there, and they won't be able to find it because there's 12,000 pages in this bill, and you just got it today, so they'll never find it, So
yeah, I would be totally in favor of that. I'm not sure exactly how it would work out because there are some large pieces of legislation that do have to have multiple variables and fund multiple agencies. For example, the defense bill, but unpacking that stuff. Yeah, I am totally with you, Sandra, and I think that's a great idea. And if anybody knows exactly how to do that, give us a shout. Sandra, I need to move on. Thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thank you.
Bye.
Walter in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Hey, Walter, what's on your mind?
Yeah, one question. How come the FBI cannot just arrest the postmaster for breaking these laws?
The FBI? Because the FBI works for Bill Barr.
Oh, okay. That's all I need to know. You answered my question.
Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you? I've been vegan for 35 years, and I don't regret it. I have a question about, this president is a scenario, again, abusing his executive power during this election and stopping all ballots, mail-in ballots on November the 3rd, declaring himself, president again. What do you think about that?
I think that he most likely will. He will probably try to claim that he won the election even if he loses it. And he's doing everything he can to sabotage the process, which is a disgrace and something we should all be, frankly, horrified about. But, I'm expecting it. We have to prepare for it. Steve in Minneapolis. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Just to set the background, yesterday, I'm calling from Minnesota, and yesterday we had our primary for... Yeah,
Ilhan Omar not only won, but trounced a candidate who about 70% of her money was coming from dark sources. Nobody knew where it was coming from. And Ilhan Omar just, really did a great job there.
Anyway, I've been an election judge for 23 elections in 13 years, so 13 of those as a head judge. Typically, election judges are like 60 or over 60 years old. And this year, of course, the governor had issued an executive order requiring a face covering in public places and in businesses. And during the course of the election, the in-person primary, we all wore masks, face shields. We had hand sanitizer. We did wipes. As we rotated our duties, we wiped down the voting booth. We wiped down all the various different surfaces. And probably people don't know this, but we get up at 5 so we can be at the polling place by 6 so we can be ready for you by 7 a.m. Anyway, during the course of this, we didn't have a really great turnout because fortunately there was a lot of people that voted early and by mail. We had 3 different people come in without wearing any masks. Actually, one did. He wore one on his chin and sporting a big grin, thinking it was cute. 2 of these people, I offered a mask to all 3 of these people. They all refused. I offered curbside voting, which is something we do in Minnesota. If you're not well enough, we can actually come out to a member of each major political party will come out to the car and make sure that you're registered to vote and make sure you have your ballot. And one of each political party will also make certain that ballot is properly cast so as not to create any advantage for anybody here. So one of the people said that they had a medical condition. You could tell by their demeanor and their stance and their body language that all 3 of these people were spoiling for a fight. So here's what really scares me. I had to let them vote as the head election judge. I had no choice. If we were in business, I could refuse them service. I had to let them vote. So we only had, during the course of this time, there was hardly anybody. When they showed up, there was like maybe one other person or something like that, or it was very, very empty. We were in a large space. I expect that the November 3rd, the general election, to be slammed. I expect us to be packed. So what happens if these anti-maskers, there's 6 of them standing in line? Will that make the people that are standing in masks want to flee and not vote? Is this? And I know at the risk of going into conspiracy theory land, is this another way? Are these people domestic terrorists? And what do we do? My next step is to call
are they
the
domestic
clerk,
terrorists?
the Secretary of State and the governor. What's that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would say yes, they are domestic terrorists. The dynamic that I'm guessing will happen, keep in mind November 3rd is several months down the road. And Omaha, Nebraska, a Republican town with a Republican city council, proudly refused to have a mask ordinance, right, for months. Yesterday, unanimously, the Omaha City Council voted to have a mask ordinance in Omaha. And the reason why is because suddenly in a red state, there's a lot of people dying, and not just Black and Hispanic people. And they got the message. We still have a few months for these fools who show up without masks to get that message. And you know, at some point, it's going to be irrefutable. I agree with you that this is probably going to be part of their strategy to intimidate people, to scare people, to, you know, we'll show up without a mask. And, you know, I don't think it's going to work. I saw a post the other day where a Democrat said, my father shipped off to Germany to fight fascists. I can brave a coronavirus to fight fascists.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So, Steve, I'm hopeful that we'll get through this and that the dynamic will change. Keep me up to date, okay?
I will. Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure to see you at the Blue State Ball.
Thank you, Steve. And welcome back. Sandy in Albemarle, North Carolina. How do you say your town, Sandy?
You can't pronounce it. It's Albemarle.
Okay. Thank you.
That's okay. North Carolina is sending out to all the registered voters a absentee ballot request form. It includes a postage-paid envelope, and you fill it out and you mail it back. And if you get your absentee ballot, then you fill that out and you mail that back. Well, being the post office is getting very slow, my electric bill is 2 days late. I would suggest you drop off your ballot at your election site or your election precinct, official county, whatever it is, and that way you beat the mail system. They also have curbside voting, no excuse. So you don't have to be handicapped or not able to walk in or whatever. Anybody can do curbside voting. So that's a good thing. You can do it during early voting, which is 2 weeks, and you can do it on Election Day. So I thought that was a good thing to pass along, let people know that they can do it either way.
Okay. Sandy, thank you for the comprehensive look at how it works there in North Carolina. I very much appreciate that, and thank you for your call. Let's see, Issy in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Issy, what's on your mind today?
Hey there. A couple of things. One, I've decided that I'm no longer calling the anti-maskers. They're just free dummies.
Yeah.
They spell freedom, F-R-E-E-D-U-M-B. Anyway.
Yeah,
I would like to know how messing with the post office like this is not just a blatant form of election interference, election tampering.
It is.
Specifically, election interference.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I believe it's illegal. The problem is that you've got an attorney general who is responsible for enforcing the laws of the United States, who obviously is not going to do anything about this. You have Republican members of the House and Senate who are just fine with this. You've got a very, very, very wealthy guy who's in charge of the the post office, who frankly doesn't give a damn. He doesn't care. He doesn't care your opinion of him or my opinion of him. It doesn't seem to me that he's amenable to public pressure, and there's no way to reach out to him anyway. I suppose the postmaster. General has a telephone number in Washington, D.C., but whether they're answering it or not, I'm sure that they don't solicit feedback from customers. So
right, I hear that. Now I guess the next question would be is, wouldn't it make sense for the Democrats to start a suit against them just to bring this fact to light? Even if it doesn't go very far, I think that we should just get out there. What about a class action suit? All of us Dems. I'm disabled, so I have trouble getting to a polling place anyway. How about if we all get together and do a class action suit against them?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. The problem that we're facing right now, and this is what Congressman Pocan is freaked out about, is that all this talk about the post office is going to cause people not to think that their mail-in ballot will work, and therefore just not to vote. I don't think anybody listening to this program is going to be thinking that way, but I get the Democratic Party's concern. But yeah, absolutely, we should be raising hell and setting up an actual criminal prosecution after the election if we can get Trump out of office. Issy, thank you for the call. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Douglas in Crystal City, Missouri. Hey, Douglas, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just called to update you on the Postal Oversight Committee, the representative from Missouri, William Clay. He was beaten in the Democratic primary earlier by a progressive gal named Cori Bush. So he'll be a lame duck. He's not coming back.
But he's still in Congress and will be until January 3rd, so he's worth lobbying.
Right. She's a progressive, though, so maybe she'll have the wherewithal to try to get it changed.
Assuming that we still have a country. I am convinced that if Donald Trump gets reelected, that literally this will no longer be the United States of America. This will begin to be the Confederate States of America, the old oligarchy and police state that rose in the South in the 1820s and cemented, or in the 1810s, and cemented its control over the South by the 1830s, John C. Calhoun and all that stuff, and took us right into a civil war. And God forbid, but I think that's also the direction that they're pushing us. So I'm very, very concerned about this.
I think we're
Douglas,
at a tipping point, too.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that information, though, on Clay. Alex in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. Hey, Alex, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Quick question. I'll get right to the point. I submitted an application for a mail-in ballot here in the swing state of PA, and amidst all the defunding going on, any idea when I should expect to receive it? I mean, how far in advance of the election? Any idea?
It varies from state to state. Every state does it the way that they do it. And so my experience here in Oregon, is not anything that would indicate your experience there. If you have any, for that, the answer to that specific question, you could probably get by calling your Secretary of State's office and simply asking. And if you do, and you find out, would you give us a shout and let us know?
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, I contacted my representative, Connor Lim, and hopefully he'll get back to me too. But
yeah, but the people actually responsible for that are who run the elections in the states are the Secretary of State, and that's where I would start. Alex, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Bob in Marseilles, Illinois, right? You pronounce the L's, right? Illinois?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you do here because we aren't in France and nobody speaks French here.
There you go.
Yeah, in any event, the reason I called is a previous caller that mentioned the one item per bill. It's called scope of legislation, and basically you can handle it with the regulations that the legislature sets up. You can handle it with laws, or you can handle it in a constitutional manner. But about 20 years ago, I looked some of this up, and it seemed that the only state legislatures that actually got anything done were ones where they had some sort of limit on the scope of legislation. It does two things. It makes the people that shake hands and bargain in a back room have some sort of credibility when they discuss things with each other, which is one of the problems we've got right now. You can't compromise if you can't trust anybody. And the other thing that it does is it prevents lawmakers from getting wiffly-waffly when you ask them why they voted for something, and they've always got another item in the same bill for an excuse.
Right. Yeah, that's great, Bob. And have there been efforts at the federal level to limit the scope of legislation?
I don't know if there's ever been an effort. I know you never got the the salad bills that you get now years ago, because there were people that could sit down and have a 3-martini lunch and shake hands and actually believe each other and make an agreement. So you didn't have to have things in the bills that work the way the bills do now.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that information. It's great. I've got the smartest listeners on earth, I'm telling you. Ralph in Kerhonkson, New York. Am I saying that right, Ralph?
That's correct. Hi, Tom. Tom, I'm calling because I'm a Bernie brother, and I've been getting bombarded with stuff from Democracy for America and all this stuff about Kamala and what a mistake she is. I think she's the smartest choice that Biden ever could have made. I never would have voted for Biden, but now that he's got Kamala on a ticket, he's got my vote. And I'm with you, Ralph, and I can tell you that the groups within the Democratic Party and even around the outside of the Democratic Party who have in the past said, please pick somebody, most of them were coalescing around Elizabeth Warren because she was probably the closest to Bernie in terms of a woman candidate. They're all going to be fully supportive of Kamala Harris, and this is going to work out. Ralph, thanks for the call. Paul in Oakland, California. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Barely. You need to get your mouth closer to your microphone.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Ralph, we'll have to pick this up tomorrow. Norman in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Norman, you got the last minute. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for calling me here. I just wanted to let you know, in addition to the woman that called last hour, that not just former students, but many of us who are long-term unemployed are also excluded from PUA long-term for health, unemployment insurance. Right. And this is kind of, supposed to be a safety net. It's not funded by payroll tax, which provides that justification for other unemployment programs. And I'm concerned there's going to be a rash. The October surprise is going to be a rash of evictions that might really affect the vote for
It's already started, Norman. It's already started. There was a piece in I believe it was Financial Times this morning, it might have been the New York Times, about how the evictions started on August 1st. Because that was in most states. Here in Oregon, we've got the governor extended it until October. I think the end of October. But
it's
in
September,
most states,
here in Oregon.
September. Oh, here in Oregon. Okay, thank you. So that would be October 1st, right? Or that would be when it gets bad. But in most states, that's what's going on. Norman, thank you for the call. We really need to deal with this stuff, and this is a real crisis. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. If we're going to hang on to it, we've got to participate in it. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. And please, this is a real difficult time for
You've been
all of us.
listening
So
to
be good to
Thom
me.
Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings, Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it.
We say fight back!